Okay, thank you. So today's SHIUR is dedicated by Hinda Levi in honor of the birthday on the 10th of Sivan of her husband, Betzalel Halevi ben Rivka, Be'ezus Hashem, Admeh Ve'esrim, in good health with much simcha and nachas. So after our last SHIUR a fortnight ago, I had an appointment immediately after that. And after that, I went to the shops and I bumped into someone. And time has that way of running away. So when I looked at my watch and I saw the time, I sped back home to say Tehillim and Daven Mincha before Shkia, before sunset. And after all of that, I looked at my phone. I hadn't checked it for messages since quite a number of hours previously. So if any of you were under any illusion that I'm actually younger than I might look on Zoom with the touch of your appearance, the fact that I could go for 5 hours quite comfortably without checking my phone should give you some indication of what generation I belong to, or what generation at least I do not belong to. But the messages were mainly voice notes. They were a mix of the joy, the pain, and the mundane that make up the stories of our lives. And then I listened to the last three. They were voice notes. The first was very upbeat. I was sending out a daily recording for Sfiras Omer with a suggested exercise to do each day. And the message was thanking me for it and telling me what this person had implemented. The second message was from someone, and she said, maybe you can help. I think you've spoken about this before. And she said, I'm stressed out about Israel with the wars in the north and the south and the plummeted public opinion. I'm feeling so upset about this, and I have to turn my mind away from everything, from the hostages, from the fighting, from the dead soldiers. It's hurting my kishkas, and I don't know how to deal with it. And the last message was from a friend of mine. And when I saw it, I was excited. We haven't spoken for a little while, and I thought to myself, oh, she probably wants to set up a time for us to chat before Shavuos, because she's in America and I'm in South Africa. So with the time difference and with our schedules, we always need to coordinate it. But it wasn't that. My friend had cancer a few years ago. Baruch Hashem, to my great joy, she's been recovering and recuperating. And the message was to tell me that the doctors had found another mass. And I was reeling. I responded to the messages, modulating my emotions as I replied to each one, going through my own personal emotional roller coaster. And as for the person who asked me the question, I thought about it for a while, and then I sent her a message telling her what I've said before in terms of don't read, listen, watch the news at all, and listen to Shiurim again. There were two that I suggested: War in Israel, Our Response, in a Surreal World. And I left it at that. But after I replied, and I was left dealing with my jumble of emotions, I realized I wasn't satisfied with the answer that I gave her. Yes, all those ideas that I spoke about in those shiurim, they're important and we need to internalize them. And they're ideas that I would very definitely share again. But yet, as a people, as a nation, we're not where we were all those months ago when I gave those shiurim. She mentioned public opinion. Do you remember the week after October the 7th? Do you remember all those photos of the Empire State Building, of Downing Street, of the Eiffel Tower? I'm sure probably Sydney, I think of Sydney Opera House was also all lit up in blue and white in solidarity. Where's the moral compass of the world now? No, Baruch Hashem, we rescued 4 hostages. Not a peep from the world that they were rescued from an area where UNRWA, Save the Children, Doctors Without Borders, and the Red Cross operate in. Instead, that same day, I saw a call for a protest in London to expel the Israeli ambassador in the UK because Israel is deliberately murdering children and women who create, sustain, and defend life. We oppose Israel's reproductive genocide. How do we relate to events, to a world that we can't understand, that makes no sense? Perhaps the answer is in the very question itself. As I sat there, the words from a rabbi when I was in seminary reverberated in my ears. Girls, you have to live the parsha. Anything that happens to you in your life is in the parsha of the week. So I opened my Chumash to Parshas Bamidbar, which was the parsha of 2 weeks ago. And I read the first two sentences. And the first two sentences are explaining that Hashem tells Moshe to take a census of the Jewish nation. And he explains to him how to do it. He says he must count the people according to their head count. And the Hebrew word used is legil golosam, which is a very peculiar expression. The Maharan Mipano, who was an Italian Kabbalist who lived in the 1500s, says that Moshe looked at every Jew and saw divine inspiration with Ruach HaKodesh, how many Gilgulim, how many times that individual soul would have to return to the world as a Gilgul via the process of transmigration of souls. Now, according to this idea of Gilgul Neshamas, our souls, most of our souls, if not all of them, have been here before. They've come before in previous bodies in previous lifetimes, and for whatever reason, after they passed on, they went to the world of souls. And Hashem said, no, they need to come, we need back again. Now, why? Every neshama, every soul has a unique mission that it has to fulfill in the world. I've spoken about this before. I've said that there's something that only you can do in the world, and Hashem needs you to do it. And this is not me being a motivational speaker when I say that. This is the truth. Our neshama has a task to do that only our neshama can do. So, if the neshama didn't do its to fulfill its tafkid, its purpose, or say the neshama had something else to rectify, or maybe chas v'shalom, it damaged itself a bit, or for whatever other reason, Hashem then gives the neshama an opportunity to come back again and again and again if necessary, until the neshama manages to get it right. So this idea is hinted to at the word legilgul sam, from the root gilgul, is that Moshe looked at every individual and saw prophetically how many times this neshama would return as a gilgul. Now, I do not profess to know anything about this. This is very Kabbalistic. And you should know me by now. I'm very, very practical. The most mystical I'll get is talking about extracting holy sparks from chocolate. And even that is very practical because I want to be able to eat my chocolate without guilt. We know the word Torah comes from the word lehorot, to teach. And that is what the Torah does for us. It teaches us how to live our life at a very practical day-to-day level. Not only that, the rule of thumb is ein lanu asik b'nistarot, delve into hidden matters. So why am I sharing this idea with you? Firstly, because you're all on mute, so you can't ask me any questions. But really, because being aware of this general concept of Gilgulim, without delving into the nitty-gritty, without getting fixated on all the minutiae, can sometimes help us process that which is incomprehensible. Unfortunately, there are many cases in life where we just say, I don't understand that. How can that happen? We know all too well over the past number of months, almost on a daily basis, we're dealing with things that are that we can't understand. No, there's the roller coaster of emotions. Baruch Hashem, we rescued 4 hostages, but at the same time, we lost the neshama, we lost a precious. We saw the joy of a hostage being reunited with her mother who was terminally ill. But at the same time, the father of one of the hostages died of a heart attack just a few hours before he heard of the release. On Sunday, I saw the photos of the 10 soldiers who were killed last week. Smiling, good boys. And that's what they were. They were good boys. And on the other hand, Sinwa and his cronies are living the good life. If you think about this too much, it can do your mind in. Sometimes such events can be easier to digest if we are aware of this concept of Gilgul. That which we see which happens before our eyes is only part of a much bigger picture. And the Maharam Mipano cites an example, and he relates something that's told in the Gemara. And it's about the children of Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha Kohen Gadol. So his children, a brother and a sister, were taken into captivity around the time of the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, the second temple, and they were sold to as slaves to different masters. And one day, these two Gentile masters meet up, and they were both raving at the beauty of their respective slaves. So they come up with a plan. They decide they're going to breed their slaves, and they will sell the beautiful offspring that they'll have, and they'll split the profits between them. I guess trading in beautiful slaves was the Bitcoin of the time. And so that's what they do. They put the brother and sister one night into a pitch black room, and they tell them what to do with each other. Now, neither the brother or the sister knew who they were sharing a room with because it was totally pitch black. And the Gemara relates that they both went to opposite sides of the room and they sat on the floor weeping. And the brother says, I'm a Kohen. I am the son of the high priests of Israel. How can I have relations with a slave girl? And the sister sits on the floor weeping, saying, I'm the best daughter of a Kohen, descended from priests of Israel. How can I become married to a slave? And they cried and cried until the dawn came. And when dawn came, they recognized each other. When they realized what had become of each other, that they were slaves, that they'd been put into the situation, what could have happened, they embraced and they cried until their souls departed and they died. The Gemara ends relating that this is what the prophet Jeremiah says, is referring to when he says in Eicha, in Lamentations, my eye weeps. How did this happen? How did this happen to the children of Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha? This is a terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy. But the Maharam Mipana says, hang on, not so fast. And he tells us something quite incredible. He says that these children were the Gilgulim of Amnon and Tamar. Now, who were they? Let's rewind a few generations. David HaMelech, King David, had several children. Two of them were Amnon and Tamar. They were not full sisters, though. They were from full siblings. They were from different parents. Now, Amnon lusted after Tamar. So he arranged a situation where she would be alone with him, and he took her by force. The Maharal Mipano says that they had to now come back as Gilgulim and be put in a similar situation where they would resist temptation and they would make a Kiddush Hashem. They would sanctify Hashem's name, and this would rectify the Chilul Hashem that they had made, the desecration of Hashem's name that they had created so many years previously. We read about the situations. How could such a thing happen to the children of Rabbi Yishmael? The answer, says the Maharan Mepano, is Sod HaGilgal, the secret of transmigration of souls. We only see half the picture. I want to stress that this doesn't mean that we only come back because we blew it in a preview. I don't want to give everybody to walk around here with complexes. I'll share another story with you, a true story. It happened in a little hamlet about an hour from Paris. There was a small Jewish community, and the community didn't have a women's mikveh. So some of the women said, well, I'm not schlepping all the way to Paris, and they didn't keep Taras and Mishpacha. Other women who did go to Paris, it was still a problem on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So there was a family, David and Esther Mizrah, and they had 9 boys, and they decided to take it upon themselves to build a mikveh for this little hamlet. They weren't people of means, so they went around to their neighbors and to neighboring cities as well to collect the funds. Now, I've worked in fundraising. It's a thankless task. Anyway, eventually, they had the money and they secured a plot of land to build this mikveh. It was actually back to back with their home, and eventually they built this beautiful mikveh. Shortly afterwards, their 2-year-old toddler, Shlomo, went missing, and they searched up and down for him, high and low. Eventually, he was found. He had somehow managed to get through the fence in between their house and the plot of the mikveh, and he drowned in the waters of the mikveh. His parents were beside themselves. How could this happen? After all the mesirus nefesh, after everything that they'd done to build this mikveh for the good of the people of the town, how could this happen? And they went from gadol to gadol, from great rabbi to great rabbi, asking how did this happen? But nothing could comfort them. Nothing could give them solace. Until about 2 weeks later, their son appeared to the father in a dream. And he says, "Father, do not be upset by what has happened, because it was my choice. Let me explain." And he says, "I was a Gilgal of one of the Baalei HaTosfos." So these were the great medieval commentators on the Talmud. And he said, "I lived in an era where there was a lot of anti-Semitism. And I was actually killed publicly for being a Jew. Because I was killed al Kiddush Hashem, for the sanctification of Hashem's name, and because of my great and lofty status, when I went up, I went straight into heaven. And every single year, I went higher and higher and higher up in Gan Eden until I reached the upper gate, and I was told I couldn't enter. And I said, why not? And they said, yes, although I was a great person, and although I died al Kiddush Hashem, I was buried, because I was shot and killed, I was buried in my clothes. And my body never received tahara, the ritual purification. So I said, well, can I go back to rectify this? And they said to me, the heavenly court said to me, there's a problem. Because of your great and lofty status, because of who you are, it's going to take something very, very, very special for you to achieve this purification. And so I sat for many years on the same level, until one day I was summoned into the heavenly court, and they said that there is a couple who lives their life l'shem shamayim, who does everything for the sake of heaven, and they are going to build a mikveh purely for the sake of heaven. And this is going to be the purest mikveh ever to exist in the history of the world. And this mikveh will be able to purify me. And so I asked to come down, and I came back down. For 2 years, I waited, not knowing whether I would actually be able to achieve the unattainable. And Baruch Hashem, I did. So do not be upset, because it's through your mesirus nefesh that I achieved heights that otherwise I would not have been able to attain. And he said, in case you think that this is just a dream and this isn't true, I'm going to prove it to you. A year to this day, you will be blessed with a daughter, the daughter that you never had. And so it was. However, this begs the question, if everything is for the best, if everything is part of the bigger picture, why was I reeling when I heard the news about my friend? Why can I relate to the person who said she's in so much pain from the war that it's hurting, it's getting to her kishkas? Because as we've discussed in previous shiurim, but I will recap here, it's a balance. It's a very delicate balance that we've got to achieve. Think of it as a dance, and I don't mean the cha-cha. I think of it as Scottish sword dancing. If you've ever seen people doing Scottish sword dancing, they dance in between swords. It's very, very hard, but it's crucial to get it right. On the one hand, we believe that everything Hashem does is for the best, that he loves us so very, 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 very much, and that he is good and that everything he does is good. On the other hand, we're human and we relate to things from a human perspective. And we're expected to do that. It's not that one should, or even that one could say, oh, okay, everything's part of a bigger picture. I'm going to go shopping now or binge watch Netflix. No, we take that pain and we use that as a catalyst to daven, to donate, to write petitions, whatever it is. So yes, it's a message, and we're meant to say not Lama, Hashem, why did this happen? But Lama, how can I respond to this in a way that I grow from this, that I live my life more fully from this, that I connect to Hashem from this? So it's a dance. On the one hand, to know that everything is for our best. And on the other hand, to experience a very real pain that we feel. And again, I just want to reiterate, as we've spoken about before, this does not mean that we condone the atrocities of Hamas and everything else that is going on. They will be held accountable for what they do. They will be punished. But at the same time, to know it's part of a bigger picture. But we're human, and this is hard. So is there anything that can help us as we make our way through this roller coaster of emotions, that we navigate this world that we find ourselves in? In this week's parasha, it says, whenever the cloud attend, the Israelites would set out accordingly, and at the spot where the cloud settled, the Israelites would encamp. They thus camped at Hashem's word and moved on at Hashem's word. So what is this talking about? When the Jews traveled throughout the desert, they would stop at certain places and set up a camp. And when they set up a camp, it was in a certain formation. And at the center of it was the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary. They had a desert that housed the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence. Now, obviously, Hashem is everywhere, but there's some places that we're more attuned, more receptive to that connection, to feeling Hashem, like if you think of the Kotel, the Western Wall. Now, above the Mishkan hovered a cloud, signifying the Shekhinah, the divine presence. When that cloud moved, it was an indication to the Jews that they had to pack up and move and continue their travels until the cloud would stop, and then they know that they would have to stop and set up camp again. Sometimes the cloud and the people traveled and they'd stay at a place and they'd stay put for a year. Other times it would just be a single night. And the Ramban actually says that there's no fixed time, there's no fixed period. And sometimes the Jews would arrive at a place that was really like, I suppose you can't be deserted in the desert, but it was really like uncomfortable and scary and whatever. And they wanted to get out of there as soon as possible, but the cloud didn't move, so they'd have to stay there. And other times, get to a place which was really gorgeous and comfortable, and they were exhausted. They just wanted to stay for a while, but they'd stay for maybe a day or two, and then the cloud would move, and they'd have to move again. Now, the Torah spends quite a number of verses telling us about this. The Torah is not a storybook. The Torah is not a history book. The Torah tells us what we need to live productive, good, wholesome lives in 2024. So this description of this cloud cam GPS seems to belie this idea. What, in Cape Town, before we had smartphones with Waze and what have you, and sometimes we'd use the mountain to get our bearings. But ladies, if you tell me that you're going to start using the clouds rather than Google Maps or Waze, I'd be worried. So what can this teach us thousands of years after we've left the desert and we don't even remember what the Mishkan was all about? There's a fascinating and perplexing Gemara discussing those few verses that I quoted at the beginning, and a brief introduction is necessary. The Torah tells us that for 6 days we should work, but on the Shabbos, on the 7th day, we rest. Now, what exactly is work? And rabbis know this drill. Rabbi, why is flipping on a light switch work, but I can move heavy furniture around the whole day and be huffing and puffing by the end of it? So the Torah, when it talks about work, uses the term melacha, which means creative work. And the Mishnah tells us, what is this creative work? It tells us that there are 39 categories of this melacha, of this creative work. And where do they derive this from? They derive this from the 39 categories of work, or the work that was done in the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. So, for example, in the Mishkan, they would sew and weave tapestries to use in it. So, too, on Shabbos, we're not allowed to sew and weave. In the Mishkan, they would cook and bake the offerings. So, on Shabbos, we're not allowed to cook and bake. In the Mishkan, they would write on each beam its respective number. So, on Shabbos, we don't write. They would also, in the Mishkan, they would also build, so we don't build on Mishkan. It's time today on Shabbos. It's time this, I'm very pleased that there weren't plantations of cocoa beans in the desert, because who knows what would have been forbidden if that was the case. Now, the Mishkan, they also dismantled it when they had to move on. I'm going to use the word demolished. So they would dismantle it, they would pack it up, and then they would, when they moved to the next place. So too on Shabbos, we are not allowed to demolish. So, according to the biblical prohibition, it's forbidden to demolish something if we intend to, for the sake of construction. So just like was, they would dismantle it, they would demolish it to pack it up and then build it again. The rabbis, however, say it's just forbidden just to demolish, even if you're not going to build something else. The rabbis put fences around the Torah just to protect us. So like we're not allowed to write on Shabbos, the rabbis say, don't even pick up a pen because you might absentmindedly come to doodle. Yet there's an enigmatic view by one of the great sages, Rabbi Yossi, and he says that it's only a biblical prohibition to demolish if you demolish something with the intention of rebuilding in the exact same space. And this, he says, is the biblical prohibition. This isn't a rabbinic view. This is a biblical prohibition. But can you see a problem? As we explained, all 39 categories of the forbidden labor, of this malacha that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos, are derived from what they did in the Mishkan. Now, when they dismantled the Mishkan, it was always for the intention of rebuilding at another place. It was never for the intention to rebuild in the exact same place. To the best of my knowledge, in all years of their wanderings in the desert, the cloud didn't start to move, wait for them all to pack up, and then jump back and say, full year. So can you hear the question? It is technical, so I'm going to recap it. The biblical prohibition of demolishing is for the sake of rebuilding. If I demolish something because I have an issue with anger management, and I'm just being destructive for the sake of it, that is rabbinic prohibition. Rabbi Yossi says, no. He says the biblical prohibition is only if you demolish something with the intent to rebuild it on the exact same place. And then we ask the question, but how can he say that? Because that we derive the laws from the laws of the Mishkan, and the Mishkan was never rebuilt in the exact same place. All got the question? All waiting in eager anticipation. The Gemara answers, since the Torah states, and the said in this week's parsha, they camped at Hashem's word and they moved on at Hashem's word. So because of that, since when they dismantled the Mishkan, it was as though they were rebuilding it in the exact same spot. Well, thanks. I'm so happy that the Gemara so clearly elucidated that for me. That answer is very, very cryptic. What on earth does the fact that the Jews camped at Hashem's word and moved at Hashem's word mean that we should disregard the fact that they journeyed from place to place in the desert and state that it's fine? So that's what Rabbi Yossi means when it says they demolished it only to be reassembled at the same spot. This makes no sense. The famed Mashgiach of Mir, very big yeshiva in actually the largest yeshiva in the world. So he answers with a beautiful parable, which I've shared before. I'm going to share again, and I've just updated it a little bit. Imagine a woman globe-trotting around the world. Okay, so from Cape Town, Johannesburg. From Johannesburg, she flies to Dubai. She's got a 20-hour layover in Dubai. So Dubai, she walks around the streets, spending lots of money on things that she doesn't really need. That's why it's called Dubai. At 2:00 in the morning, exhausted, she goes back. She boards her plane for Perth. I've done that Cape Town, Perth via Dubai with the 20-hour layover before. It's not fun. When she arrives in Perth, she's so exhausted, she forgot that she had an apple in her backpack. And that is enough for border control to decide she is a threat to the state and send her back to Dubai. She gets back to Dubai absolutely, totally exhausted. She'll move her Israel leg of her journey bring it closer. She gets there, she finds out that Emirates is not flying to Israel because it's a war zone. Absolutely exhausted, bleary-eyed, she says, fine, I'll do my America leg of the journey. She travels to America, she goes to New York, she goes to LA, she goes to Atlanta, then she goes to Rwanda, she goes down to Rio, and then finally she travels back to South Africa. In every single space, in every single place, she has to wait in long lines to go through passport control and security. She has to wait in lines to board and disembark the plane. She has to scrounge, run around the airports, the shops, trying to find kosher food. Is it just me who gets absolutely famished when I'm traveling and then like goes to all the shops? In every single place, she has to deal with the luggage, Ubers, settling into an Airbnb. Every single place has its own currency, its own culture, its own systems, and its ways that it works. But what if this woman is holding a baby when she takes this journey around the world? If that baby was asked where he'd been all these days, these weeks, these months, if this baby had asked what the number of countries he'd been to, the number of lines he'd had to stay in, that baby was asked how he managed with going through all that passport control and the security and all of that, if you said to him, like how you dealt with went around through all these diverse locations, the baby would look at you and say, huh? What are you talking about? I was in the same place the entire time, snuggled in my mummy's arms. For the baby, there's little difference between continents, countries, cities, states. After all the long, grueling, strenuous lines mean nothing to him. He's protected from it all. Throughout all the fluctuations and vicissitudes, he's in the same place. He's in his mother's arms, oblivious to it all. From his experience, he's not even moving around from one end of the globe to the other. He's lodged comfortably in the safest and most nurturing place on earth, his mother's embrace. This, then, is the meaning of the Gemara's answer, since the Torah states that they camped at Hashem's word and they moved at Hashem's word. That when they dismantled the Mishkan, it was as if it was in the exact same, and rebuilt it, it was in the same space. While journeying in the desert, the Jews experienced themselves as being lodged 24/7 in Hashem's protective arms. From their perspective, they were always situated in the same place. Sure, geographically they may have been moving around, but in their consciousness, they had not moved anywhere. They were in the same spot, in the loving and protective embrace of Hashem. As Moshe tells the Jews in Devarim, and in the desert, where you have seen how the Lord your God has carried you, as a man carries his son, all the way that you have gone, until you have come to this place. I've never been a fan of roller coasters. In fact, I don't even think I've been on one. Just watching is enough for me. As a teenager, the shells, you know what I'm talking about, were the most I could do. I feel nauseous just thinking about them. If you've ever been to Cape Town, you might see there's a blue choo-choo train. So choo-choo train I could deal with. And sometimes, but not often, life is like a choo-choo train. But more often, it's like a roller coaster, and we have our ups and our downs, and we don't know what's going to hit us next. But if we realize that throughout those ups and downs, I'm situated in Hashem's arms, whose love is greater than any parent's, then that gives me a sense of security, stability, and serenity. We carry different burdens on our shoulders, both in our personal lives and as a nation. But if we know that we are always, always, always lodged in Hashem's protective embrace, and even as you're moving from place to place, be it emotionally, mentally, or even geographically, you always remain in the same space, in the space of love and connection to Hashem. And in that space, you are safe, secure, confident, and protected. I'm not saying that from now on we're always going to be serene and calm and never get flustered and never feel pain about anything. Rabbi Biederman gives an example, and he tells a story that happened with a Rebbe who was having a tish. All his Hasidim, they were singing, they were dancing, and he was speaking, and he was saying, this entire world is not worth a single kleks, a single sigh, a single screech of pain. He says the only thing that's important is Olam Haba, the world to come. And as he's giving this Devar Torah, as he's speaking, one of the benches that the Hasidim were sitting on fell and hit him and wounded him. And he let out this cracks, this scream of pain. And one of the Hasidim said, Rebbe, you just said that the whole world is not worth a single cracks. And he said, I know, it's true. He said, but what can I do? When you're in pain, you shout out. And so we do. We will feel that pain. But think of a baby. Think of a baby and a parent having to take their baby for an injection, for a vaccination. Now, that baby, from its perspective, it's being stabbed. It sees this injection, it's being tortured and stabbed by this doctor. Not only his parents are putting him in that situation, are holding him down, and the baby is screaming and crying and crying and crying. However, after the injection, after it's endured that pain, what does the baby do? The baby doesn't turn around and give its parents a silent treatment and say, forget it, I want nothing to do with you. No. The baby instinctively turns to its parent for comfort because it knows that its parent loves it. So that's what these ideas do for us. It's not saying we're never going to feel pain. It's not saying that there's not going to be challenges, but it's saying that even though we may not be totally serene, we're not going to be debilitated from this overwhelming anxiety and despair. Rather, we will use that to turn to Hashem, who loves us so very, very, very much. There's a story in Small Miracles of the Holocaust. And 1944, the drill was the same. After days of traveling in the cattle cars, cramped, people dying, no water, the conditions we've heard, they finally reach their destination, Auschwitz. And they're told to strip. The Nazis would say to them, sometimes you'll get them back. We just want you to clean up, delouse you, have a shower. We know it was all lies. And it's 1944. And although those in Poland, the Jews that were still alive, this had been going on for a while, Hungary was one of the last places that Hitler invaded. And this transport was from Hungary, and a group of very wealthy, elegant Jews step out the cattle carts, not really knowing what was going to go on. And watching them disembark are two Polish women. Now, these were not prisoners. These were actually Polish day laborers, and they lived in the surrounding Auschwitz, and they would come in and work at Auschwitz. They would help separate all the different clothes and belongings of the Jews and decide which would be shipped back to Germany and what would and what not. And they weren't Nazis. In fact, the older sister, Anna, had just told her younger sister, Christina, a few days before that she didn't think she could take it working there any longer. She said the screams when the Jews got into the gas chambers, realizing that this wasn't water, it was gas. She said, it's haunting me. I can't handle it anymore. Still, avarice glittered in their eyes when they saw these people come out the cattle cart, because they were all very elegant, all very dressed very wealthily. And Anna looks at this woman, very beautiful woman, standing out with this magnificent silver fox skin coat on. And she says, ooh, she says, I want that. And as the woman drops the coat to the ground, the two sisters run. Now, although you weren't allowed to take anything, it was strictly forbidden, this happened at Auschwitz. Pilfering went on, and Christina and Anna used to regularly go through the warehouse and take some money and food and what have you that the Jews had left behind when they went to the gas chambers. So she runs, so nobody takes a second notice, glance at her when she runs, and she picks up the coat. And as she picks up the coat, she feels something wriggle inside it. And she looks at it, and there is a tiny little infant, swaddled infant, couldn't be more than a week or two old. And she gasps and she calls her sister, and she says, look at this. And they look at each other, and they don't know what to do. They know for sure, if the Nazis catch sight of it, that's the end of the baby. Their treatment to babies were particularly heinous, that they would throw them up in the air and use them for target practice, brutally kill them in front of their parents, or throw them alive into burning fires. So their hearts melt. And Christina, even more than Anna, because Anna had children, but Christina is 44 years old, and she and her husband are childless. And she says, I'm keeping this child. She says, we both know the parents are dead. They've gone to the gas chamber. She says, I feel that the Lord has given me this child. So Anna says, well, how are you going to get this child out of Auschwitz? So she said, I can thank the Lord that I'm heavy. She said, I'm going to go into one of the rooms. She says, I'll cut myself so that it looks as I'm bleeding. And I was pregnant all along, and I just gave birth now. She said, nobody will think that a baby, that found a baby in a coat, or that we would even think of adopting a Jewish baby. It works. She leaves Auschwitz with the baby, never to return. She comes home, and her husband immediately agrees to keep the baby, but says, where are we going to get the money to raise her? So Christine's a shrewd woman, and she says, you know what? These Jews, they often would sew things into the lining of their clothes. Let's unpick it and see if there's anything there. And so that's what they do, and they find enough cash in Hungarian currency for them to live in the lap of luxury for the rest of their lives. And they also find a beautifully crafted gold pendant with a little locket and a few words written in some language inside. So she keeps it. She says, you know what, it's real gold. Maybe one day I'll want to give this to her. After the war, with their newfound cash reserves, they moved to Budapest. And there they raised their daughter, who they named Lila, in the lap of luxury. And every single thing, she's educated in the best schools. Any single whim she wanted, ballet, dancing, drama, art, she had everything. And she turns into a lovely, young, studious student. She goes off to medical school. She becomes a pediatric surgeon, and she opens her own flourishing business. And eventually she marries a fine Christian man, Hans, and has a set of twins. Her husband is so excited, and he says, let's have a party to celebrate their birth. And so they decide, she'll give her a month to recover, and then they'll celebrate the baby's 4-week birthday. And Hans is very excited. He says, I'll ask my parents to come from Czechoslovakia to celebrate. And so in the morning, he goes to the train station to fetch his parents, and Lila's parents want to go along as well to greet his parents. The train station isn't very far, so she expected her husband to be back in an hour, but he's not back. After 2 hours, Lila starts to worry. She gets a bit anxious. 3 hours passed, 4 hours, she's totally frantic, and she calls a neighbor and says, please, can you come look after the babies? As she opens the door to leave, she's greeted by a policeman who doesn't want to look her in the face. And she screams, what happened? And he says, I'm so sorry. He said, it was very, very foggy, and your husband couldn't see where he was going and lost control of the car and drove straight into an oncoming train. He said, they all died. Your husband, his parents, your parents. They were all killed. I'm so sorry. A few months after the tragedy, Anna, Christina's sister and Lila's aunt, comes to visit her. And she says, I know how much pain you're in, and I don't want to add to your trauma. She says, but I feel the time has come that I have to give you this letter that I promised my sister I would if anything happened to you. I'm sorry, I don't want to add to any more of your trauma. And with that, she hands a letter to Lila. Lila opens the letter, sees her mother's handwriting, and begins to read the story of how she was found, of who she really is. And she's devastated. She says, what does it mean? She says, I'm not their child. I'm Jewish. She says, I don't know. And her aunt says, Lila, she says, my sister loved you as her daughter. You will always be her child. And she said, you were raised a good Christian, and that's what you'll remain. But, and Lila's distraught, and she says, do you know my parents' names? Do you know anything? She says, no. And then she says, and then her aunt says, you know what? Something's coming back to me. I do remember that they found a little locket, and your mum kept that. I know you haven't been able to deal with going back to and cleaning up their house. I'll go to their apartment and I'll see if I can find anything. Later on that day, she comes back and she hands Lila this little locket that has some words in a foreign language. Lila's just cries and cries and cries and cries for weeks. And a few weeks later, she goes and she speaks to a rabbi in Budapest. And she tells him the story. And she says, what must I do? Who am I? I don't know how. Must I remain a Christian? Am I Jewish? I've never met a Jew until before today. And the rabbi says, I really feel for you. And I cannot tell you what to do. He says, but there's a famous rabbi who lives in Brooklyn, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said, write to him. I will give you his address. And he will tell you what to do. A few weeks later, two strangers, a man and a woman, appear at Lila's front door. And the man's wearing a black hat and a black suit and a beard, and the woman's dressed modestly with a scarf over her hair. And they say, hello. The Lubavitcher Rebbe asked us to come personally to deliver his answer to you. He says you should move to Israel and try to return to your roots. And he said, we are here to help you. We will do everything for you. We will help you pack up, and we will help you move with to Israel, and we will find you a place to stay and get you a job. Israel's desperately short of pediatric surgeons, and we will help you, and we will not leave your side until you feel that you are settled in Israel. And that's what they did. Lila at the time said, can you just tell me? She said, what is this locket? Because since she'd been receiving the locket, she'd been wearing it every single day. She says, can you tell me what these words mean? And the rabbi looks at it and he smiles and he says, at least now we know what your name is. It's Leah Bas Miriam. And she asks, any last name? And he says, no last name. So Lila, now Leah, moves to Jerusalem. She becomes observant, fluent in Hebrew, Judaism, and she eventually remarries a Baal Tshuva Shmuel, and she has another two children. One day, the kids are clamoring for pizza, and not just any pizza, they want Jerusalem's best, which means a trip down to Ben Yehuda, to the pizza store where everybody wanted to be. Now, parking in that area of Jerusalem is an absolute premium. And after they circled and circled and circled around and couldn't find parking, Shmuel turns to Leah and he says, I've got an idea. You stay here in the car. I'll go and get takeaway and we'll eat it at home. So he goes and he waits in a queue because it was absolutely packed. Everybody wanted this and waits and waits. And eventually, as he's about to pay, at that moment, an Arab suicide bomber detonates his explosive vests. There were dozens of victims that day, and Shmuel was among them. And Leah's crying, and she's saying, Hashem, how I finally meet somebody, come back to my roots, find something. How? What do you want from me? My life is so full of tragedy. And as she's crying there, and a co-worker comes and says, Leah, she worked at a hospital, and she says there are dozens and dozens of mortally wounded children coming in now. She says, I feel terrible. I feel awful asking you to come now. But Leah, if you don't, we are so short-staffed. We come now. These children will die. There are not enough pediatric surgeons to come around. I'm so sorry. But please, you have to come. I'm going to read the rest to you. The day was a blur of blood and blackened faces as endless stretchers were rushed into the operating room. Leah worked heroically to save them all, despite the fact that she had lost her own husband. Her own pain and grief and horror had to be set aside so that she could save others. She concentrated so hard on the mangled bodies before her that she didn't even notice a frantic nurse arguing with an elderly man who had defied hospital rules and barged into the operating room. Where is my granddaughter? He screamed. I'm not leaving until I find her. Zadie, a voice called weakly from a stretcher. I'm here. The elderly man rushed over to a young child who was waiting with others waiting for their turn. The most critical cases had been taken in first, and although the little girl presented a terrifying spectre, drenched in blood, her condition had not been deemed as serious as many of the others. Please, Adonis, sir, you must get out of the operating room now, the nurse begged. No, he roared. I'm not moving from her side. Having just finished another surgery, Leah went over to speak to the man. She says, don't worry. She says, I'll take care of her. She'll be fine, despite what she looks like. Her injuries are not so bad. No, he screams, I'm not leaving her side until you promise I'll be allowed to with her every step of the way. Leah sighed. She was not going to waste precious time arguing. Let him scrub in, she told the incredulous nurse. I'll undress the child myself. She pulled off her surgical mask for a moment to grab a drink of water. She hadn't eaten all day. The elderly man looked at her, startled. He had seemed oblivious to her presence before, but now his eyes seemed to bore into her. Leah gently undressed the young girl, and as she pulled off her outer garments, her hand paused in mid-air. Her heart skipped a beat as she surveyed a beautiful gold pendant around the little girl's neck, a pendant that was an exact replica of her own. Leah was shaken, but set aside her feelings to tend to the girl's injuries, which didn't require surgery after all. After the girl was treated, Leah left for a breath of fresh air. All the events of the day converged on her at once. She felt as if she was about to faint. She hadn't noticed the elderly man following her out of the door. Miriam, he called after her, his voice quivering. What? She stared at him, muddled, feeling the brightly lit hospital corridor growing dim, the walls closing in on her. Miriam, he asked again, and then peered at her more closely. Oh, I'm sorry. I've made a mistake. You're too young to be Miriam. She would be in her 70s by now. You look exactly like someone I knew very well before the war. Exactly. The resemblance is uncanny. When you took off your surgical mask, you gave me a shock. How is this possible? He began to walk away, shaking his head in disbelief. Wait a second, she ran after him. My name is Leah Bass, Miriam. Does that mean anything to you? Then she yanked off the pendant around her neck, the pendant she perpetually wore, the pendant that was an exact replica of the one worn by the man's granddaughter. And does this mean anything to you? Where did you get this from? He asked slowly. From my mother. Yes, he answered numbly. You do look exactly like your mother. That pendant is an original design. I should know. I am the one who handcrafted it. I used to be a jewelry designer, and I've made the same necklace for each and every one of my grandchildren. But the first one that I made was for my only child, of my first wife, who perished in Auschwitz. All these years, I was sure that you had perished too. Leah, I am your father. At the funeral for her husband and during the Shiva, Leah was surrounded by her newfound family, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, cousins, and of course her father. As she leaned forward to catch the gently murmured words of comfort, bowed her head solemnly when they chanted the requisite Hebrew prayer to the bereaved, and raised her eyes in gratitude as they crowded around her protectively, the morning sun streaming through the windows glinted off the gold pendant, circling her neck. Leah touched it lightly every now and then, thinking of the magic it had wrought in the most tragic of times. Like the mythical baby phoenix born from its mother's own ashes, so too did the Jewish people mystically survive over the millennia, sparks of light arising from the deepest depths of darkness in a constant cycle that never seems to end. At the start of the SHIUR, we asked, how do you comprehend events, a world that we cannot understand? Answers, Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv of Kelm. The greatest student is the one who recognizes that he knows nothing. And that is all we need to understand, is that we don't. Okay.